Hey everybody, welcome to day 6 of the Dominaria set review on the Mana Leek. I'm John as always, and it's the last day. We're going to cover all of the gold cards, all of the artifact cards, the single colorless card, and the land card. So this one will probably be slightly longer as we're going to review more cards, but let's jump right on into the first gold card. Up first we have Adeliz, the Cinderwind. Let's go with Adeliz. She is a 1 blue-red legendary creature human wizard at uncommon. She's a 2/2 with flying and haste. She doesn't look like she's flying, and it's gonna bug the hell out of me. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, wizards you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. As I said, I will 100% of the time forget that this has flying. Anyways, it's a 2/2 flying with haste, which is fine. For 3 mana, it's even solid, I would say. Getting a little bit of wizard synergy will help as well, but I don't think the wizard deck truly exists. She's not really a first pick, but if you are heading towards blue-red, especially if you're trying out that wizard's tribal, it's a solid pickup. I think it's a B- that does vary a little tiny bit depending on how your draft is looking. So B- for Adeliz, the Cinderwind. Up next is Arvad the Cursed. Arvad the Cursed is 3 white-black for a legendary creature Vampire Knight at uncommon. He's a 3/3. He's got Death Touch, but he's got lifelink. Other legendary creatures you control get +2/+2. It's a 5 mana 3/3 Death Touch lifelinker. I'm sold right there. And if you're going deep on legendaries, pumping them all by 2 sounds pretty good. I see a lot of people wondering if you're actually going to get that many legendaries. You got to remember, there's a legendary in every single pack minimum. And of course, many packs may have 2 or more. So there's going to be legendaries. You're going to have them in your deck. You may not have 10, but you're going to have some. And so I think Arvad will be pretty decent in several decks. Plus, it is just a 3/3 Death Touch lifelinker. So I've got Arvad at a B+. I would probably consider first picking it. Up next is Ariel, Knight of Windgrace. Ariel is 2 white-black for a legendary creature human knight at rare. She's a 4/4 with vigilance, so a 4/4 for 4. 2 and a white, tap her. Create a 2/2 white knight creature token with vigilance. Pay black, tap it, also tap X untapped knight you control. Destroy target creature with power X or less. Ariel looks great. She's a 4/4 for 4 with vigilance, which is already totally fine. That's a solid card. That's like a B- right there. But dropping 2/2 knights every turn if you want, that is serious business. It reminds me of Bloodline Keeper from original Innistrad. And then getting to kill things with those tokens and any other knights you have, maybe an Arvad, for example. Easy first pick, pretty darn bomby, and I think she's just a straight A for Ariel, Knight of Windgrace. Up next is Daragaz Reincarnated. Daragaz Reincarnated is 4 black, red, green for a legendary creature dragon at Mythic. It's a 7/7. It's got flying. It's got trample. It's got haste. If it would die, instead you exile it with 3 egg counters on it. At the beginning of your upkeep, if Daragaz is exiled with an egg counter on it, remove an egg counter from it. Then, if Daragaz has no egg counters on it, return it to the battlefield. So it's a 7/7 for 7. Flying, trample, haste. That is insane. However, it does cost 3 colors in what is not a 3-color format, but green has ways, so that is pretty good to see that there is green in Daragaz's casting costs. And it doesn't die. You have to exile this somehow. You have to hit it with a Blessed Light or something like that. Otherwise, it just keeps coming back 3 turns later, which is a long time. But if you survive and it comes back, it's just going to be a beating. Daragaz looks really good. That casting cost hurts. You have to be very careful with this. You have to make sure that you're going green with the green fixing. But if you are, I think Daragaz is a solid A. But if your black-red deck is looking good and you do open this pack 3, you probably can try to get by just playing 3 forests in your deck, because this obviously doesn't need to come down till turn 7. You have a lot of time to find them. So straight A for Daragaz Reincarnated. Garna the Bloodflame is up next. Garna is 3 black-red for a legendary creature human warrior at uncommon. She's a 3/3 with flash. When Garna the Bloodflame enters the battlefield, return to your hand all creature cards in your graveyard that were put there from anywhere this turn. Other creatures you control have haste. Garna's interesting. She's a 3/3 flash for 5, which can do some work, but potentially returning a sizable board is going to be a pretty big game. Your other creatures having haste will accelerate the game heavily as well. All in all, she's a good card, not one that I think I would first pick, but once I'm headed towards black-red, I think she's a solid pick. So I think she's just kind of a solid B, but not too much higher than that. Up next is Grand Warlord Radha. Grand Warlord Radha is 2 red-green for a legendary creature elf warrior at rare. She's a 3/4 with haste. Whenever one or more creatures you control attack, add that much mana in any combination of red and or green until end of turn. You don't lose this mana as steps and phases end. A 3/4 for haste for 4 is fine and playable, and giving you mana is cool. Getting more mana as you attack can really drastically snowball the game as well. If you, suddenly you're double spelling on turn 5 or 6 or whatever. I think Radha just misses on being like a snap first pick, but the second that you're in one of those colors, I think you're pretty happy to grab her, and truth be told, I'd probably first pick her if I saw her. I think she's a strong B+ for Grand Warlord Radha. Up next is Halar the Fire Fletcher. Halar is 1 and a red-green for a legendary creature elf archer at uncommon. It's a 3/3 with trample. Whenever you cast a spell, if that spell was kicked, put a +1/+1 counter on Halar the Fire Fletcher. Then Halar deals damage equal to the number of +1/+1 counters on it to each opponent. It's a 3/3 trample for 3. That's great. We played Kenra Charioteer. Kenra Charioteer was a solid card. And if you've got a number of kicker spells, this could eventually get really good with the damage dealing. But it is just a solidly costed trampler. So it's not a first pick, but once you're red-green, once you're looking towards red-green, it's an easy choice. I've got it as just a straight solid B. If you have kicker spells, probably just gets itself up there to a B+. Up next is Joyra, Weatherlight Captain. Joyra is 2 blue-red for a legendary creature human artificer at Mythic. She's a 3/3. Whenever you cast a historic spell, draw a card. This, of course, is a great pickup if you are trying out that blue-red artifact deck that I think might exist and I hope exists. But it doesn't even have to be artifacts because it's historic, so it can be your legendary spells, it can be your sagas, etc. Joyra is a 3/3 for 4 that hopefully can draw you some number of cards, and I think that number is going to be decently high. You obviously have to go in on it, but I think the second you do, she's pretty darn good. I've got her at an A-, assuming you are in the blue-red heavy historic deck. If you're not, she's going to drop down a little bit depending on how much you do have. But I've got her at an A- for what I want to do with her anyways. So A- for Joyra, Weatherlight Captain. Up next is Joda, Archmage Eternal. Joda, Archmage Eternal is 1 blue, red, white for a legendary creature human wizard at rare. He's a 4/3 with flying, and again, is not flying, but whatever. You may pay white, blue, black, red, green, rather than pay the mana cost for spells that you cast. This is garbage. This is a commander plant. It is not worth it in limited. It's 3 colors in a 2-color format. The body's fine and alright for the casting cost if you ignore the color restrictions of it, and the ability is just not something you're ever going to pull off in limited. I'm sure someone will do it once and it'll be cool and they'll probably still just lose, but it's not going to be me. If you want to win, you should never be picking or playing this card, so I've got Joda at an F. Up next is Muldrotha the Gravetide. Muldrotha is 3 black, green, blue for a legendary creature elemental avatar at Mythic. It's a 6/6. During each of your turns, you may play up to 1 permanent card of each permanent type from your graveyard. So if your graveyard has an artifact and a creature, you can play an artifact and a creature, for example. Muldrotha's great. Muldrotha is really good. That casting cost, though, you probably need to make sure that you're green. But again, like Daragaz, she is a 6-drop. You have some time to get that extra mana if you are, for example, black-blue and you're splashing green. But when she comes down, she is really good. A 6/6 that's going to get back your creatures so you can attack your creatures in, you can chump block with your creatures, etc. I think she's really cool. I would definitely be excited to play with her. That casting cost is going to be a real restriction, though. So I've got her at like a B+, but that is assuming you can cast her, so be careful with that. Oath of Teferi is up next. Oath of Teferi is 3 white-blue for a legendary enchantment at rare. When Oath of Teferi enters the battlefield, exile another target permanent you control. Return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So it's a Cloud Shift, although not exactly Cloud Shift, for 5 mana. But what else do you get? Well, you may activate the loyalty abilities of your planeswalkers you control twice each turn rather than only once. And once is probably the only time you're ever going to pull off that combo. Yeah, Oath of Teferi is bad. It's a straight F. It's like an F-. It is not for limited. You are not going to have this plus planeswalkers, and the ability is not worth 5 mana at sorcery speed. This is a straight F-. It should be last pick in basically every single pack ever. F-. Up next is Primeval's Glorious Rebirth. Primeval's Glorious Rebirth is 5 white black for legendary sorcery at rare. Return all legendary permanent cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. This is, it's probably just not worth it. 7 mana, you have to have a legendary on the field, plus you have to have a bunch of legendaries in the graveyard for it to really go off. I'm higher than most on how many legendaries I think you're going to have in your deck, and I don't think you're going to have enough to pull this off. So I've got this at a D. There's just way too much that has to go right here, and frankly, the going right is probably going wrong, meaning that you're playing all of your awesome legendaries and they're dying left, right, and center. So I'm out on Primeval's Glorious Rebirth. I've got it at a D. Up next is Wrath Capuchin, Ship's Mage. 2 white-blue for a legendary creature, human wizard at uncommon. It's a 3/3 with flash and flying. The art doesn't really show that he's flying. You may cast historic spells as though they had flash. It's a 3/3 flash fire for 4. That's solid. That's great. That's always playable. It's a decently high mid-pack, even early-ish pack pick. If you have a lot of Artifact Sagas legendaries, then this goes up in value even more. Also a ton of value in that your opponent will have no clue that you have a flyer, because this doesn't fly in the art. Anyways, B- for Wrath Capuchin. Up next is Rona, Disciple of Gix. Rona is 1 blue-black for legendary creature, human artificer at common, also the name of a very prominent hardware store in Canada. Rona is a 2/2. When Rona, Disciple of Gix, enters the battlefield, you may exile target historic card from your graveyard. You may cast non-land cards exiled with Rona. Pay 4 and tap, exile the top card of your library. Rona is, she doesn't seem the absolute best to me, but if you can go really grindy late game blue-black, then she'll put in a fair bit of value. Returning a historic card from your graveyard's kind of random. It might hit something, it might not. I don't think you can just assume that you're going to have that target all the time. Getting to basically draw a card for 4 is really nice late game, and I do hope she's good, because if she's good, it means the format's the kind of format that I tend to love. Unfortunately, she is really vulnerable, and those cards that you drew with her may just disappear off into the exile zone forever. All told, I think she'll be a Weather Vane of the format, where if it's slow, she'll be like a B, and if it's not that slow, she'll be like a C-. So let's go with an optimistic B for Rona, Disciple of Gix. Shauna, Sisay's Legacy is up next. Shauna is a green-white legendary creature human warrior at uncommon. She's a 0/0. Shauna, Sisay's Legacy can't be the target of abilities your opponents control. Shauna gets +1/+1 for each creature you control. So, at absolute worst, she's a 1/1 for 2 that doesn't have hexproof, and you're going to get some value off your opponents thinking she has hexproof. She has, creature ability hexproof. Hexproof from creature abilities, we'll say. She's fine. Obviously, you want to go wide, which, hey, you're in green-white. That's probably part of your plan anyways, as she gets bigger and bigger and bigger. But she still does just die to any sort of removal spells, anything like that. So you got to be careful with her. All in all, I think she's fine. If you're in green-white, you'll 100% play her and be kind of happy about it at kind of like the B level. I don't think you go crazy over her, though. I don't think you first pick her. I don't think you say, well, I'm green and I don't know where I want to go. Aha, I'm green-white now. I don't even think she's quite there. So I've got her at like a B-, I think. So B- for Shauna, Sisay's Legacy. Up next is Slimefoot the Stowaway. Slimefoot the Stowaway is 1 black-green for a legendary creature fungus at uncommon. It's a 2/3. Whenever a sapperling you control dies, Slimefoot the Stowaway deals 1 damage to each opponent, and you gain 1 life. Pay 4, create a 1/1 green sapperling creature token. Slimefoot is obviously a huge build-around. It goes solidly into that green-black Sapperlings deck, because you pay 4 and you make a Sapperling, and then you sack a Sapperling to draw a card, but sacking that Sapperling also drains your opponent 1 because you have Slimefoot, and etc., etc., etc. It's going to be a really fun deck. I'm really hoping I get to build this sort of aristocrat-style deck. I don't know how high of a pick Slimefoot is. I think it's a solidly high pick. I don't know if I would first pick it, but I think it is real good. I've got it at like a B+, because even if you're not in like the aristocrats full-on using it Sapperlings deck, Still just pumping out 1/1s is a pretty solid game. So B+ for Slimefoot, the Stowaway. Up next is Tatyova, Benthic Druid. Tatyova is 3 green-blue for a legendary creature Merfolk Druid at uncommon. She's a 3/3. Whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life, and you draw a card. Seems good. You know, turning every late-game land draw into a random card. Sure. But we are talking turn 6 and later here to get a 3/3. I think she's probably just a little too expensive for what she does to be good. I don't know if I'd want a format where a card cheaper than this is at uncommon though, so I can't really complain too much. I think she's decent, but I think you have to get there. So I've got her at a B-. If you're green-blue, you'll probably just always play her, but she may just not come down quite in time to generate you all the value that you really, really, really want. So B- for Tatyova, Benthic Druid. Up next is Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. Teferi is 3 white-blue for a legendary Planeswalker Teferi at Mythic. Starts with 4 loyalty, so he just missed the vanilla Planeswalker test. +1, draw a card at the beginning of your next end step, untap 2 lands. -3, put target non-land permanent into its owner's library, 3rd from the top. -8, you get an emblem with, whenever you draw a card, exile target permanent an opponent controls. Unlike Jaya, Teferi looks fantastic for limited. Draws cards and untaps lands. Protects himself with his -3 for several turns, because that big scary creature is not coming back for a while. And the ultimate is going to just ruin your opponent's chances of staying in the game. You're exiling a creature every single turn. At least. If you're still +1ing him, that's 2 a turn. Teferi's a slam A+ first pick. You will first pick it every single time, and it's going to just win games for you. So A+ for Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. Our final gold card is Tiana, Ship's Caretaker. Tiana is 3 red-white for a legendary creature Angel Artificer at uncommon. She's a 3/3 with flying and first strike. Whenever an aura or equipment you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you may return that card to its owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step. She's a 3/3 flying first striker, and I think that's about it. The equipment thing isn't really happening. As we'll take a look, there's some equipment in the set, is a statement that I'm willing to say. And the auras, I guess, are cool. On Sarah's Wings is really good. Then there are some others, I suppose. Getting them back after the creature dies is cool. It turns them into Rancors, but not many of the auras are Rancor level. So ultimately, I think she's just fine as a 3/3 flying first striker, and I'll put her at a B-. I don't think you try to go too deep on her. I think you just get some incidental value if you happen to find it. So B- for Tiana, Ship's Caretaker. Moving on to the artifacts, or more specifically, colorless card we're going to start with first. We have Karn, Scion of Urza. Karn, Scion of Urza is a 4 generic mana legendary Planeswalker Karn at Mythic. He starts with 5 loyalty, crushing that Planeswalker vanilla test. +1, reveal the top 2 cards of your library. An opponent chooses one of them. Put that card into your hand, and exile the other with a silver counter on it. So your opponent gets to pick which card you draw. -1, put a card you own with a silver counter on it from exile into your hand. So you still get to draw it next turn if you really want to. -2, create a 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token with, this creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. So the first one is at least a +1/+1. It's at least a 1/1 because it sees itself. And then of course they get bigger the more you make. Karn seems fantastic, just like Teferi. It's not Karn Liberated insane, which is insane, but he is pretty darn good here. 4 mana, 5 loyalty puts him above the curve for a lot of walkers. +1 nets you a card, even if it's not the one that you super want, but if there is one that you super want that your opponent exiled, you just get it next turn, and it protects himself with those +1 or with those 1/1s that become 2/2s, 3/3s, 4/4s, 5/5s if you have artifacts. Seems fantastic. Again, another snap first pick. I think it wins you games. Karn is great. A+ for Karn. Moving from colorless to artifacts, because of course Karn is not an artifact anymore. Apparently, we have Aether. It's not Ether, but it's like Aether. Let's not try to say that word ever again. 3 generic mana for an artifact creature bird construct at common. It's a 2/1 flying, and it can't block. I had this a little bit higher in my original rating because I thought it was a 2 mana 2/1 that couldn't block. I thought it was like a Vaporkin or something, but obviously a worse Vaporkin because it can't even block flyers. But it's 3 mana. That's costly. This is pure filler level. Uh-oh, my deck didn't quite work out properly, and I need a creature kind of card. So a C-. If you are super aggro, this maybe can get in for actual damage if, you know, your opponent is starting to stall down on the board and you just keep getting in the air for 2. But I'm not going to go any higher than a C- for this card. Up next is Amaranthine Wall. Amaranthine Wall is 4 generic mana for an artifact creature wall at uncommon. It's an 0/6 with defender, as walls have, and for 2 generic mana, you can make it indestructible until end of turn. Not a big fan of this wall. It's an 0/6 for 4. That's really late in the game. Typically, you want to have walls and blockers because your opponent's being aggressive, and starting that defense on turn 4 is not where you want to be. Plus, it's just one wall. Look at the art. You can walk around that thing, and your opponent will. One creature will slam into this, and the others will just feed around it. Not a fan of Amaranthine Wall, definitely not in the main deck, and probably not often out of the sideboard either. I've got Amaranthine Wall at a D. Up next is Black Blade Reforged. Black Blade Reforged is 2 generic mana for a legendary artifact equipment. At rare, equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each land you control. Sounds pretty good. Equip legendary creature for 3 generic mana. Equip any other creature for 7 generic mana. Black Blade is iffy. Iffy. Equipping this to a non-legendary is, I think, just a pipe dream. If you find yourself in that situation, cool. But equipping the legendary for 3 generic mana, when you probably have at least 3 or 4 lands, giving them +4/+4, +3/+3, is going to be really, really good. Ultimately, I think you do need to have a whole bunch of legendary creatures in your deck. You need to be kind of the black-white Arvod legendary deck to really play this card. If you don't have at least probably 5 or 6 legendaries, you don't play this sword, unfortunately. So I've got it at a B- if you have the critical mass of legendaries. If you don't, you probably shouldn't play this card. So B- for Black Blade Reforged in specific situations. Up next is Blood Tallow Candle. Blood Tallow Candle is hard to say. It's 1 generic mana for an artifact at common. Pay 6 generic mana, tap it, sacrifice Blood Tallow Candle. Target creature gets -5/-5 until end of turn. This is similar to Universal Solvent from Aether Revolt, except that just flat out killed a creature. This may not always kill a creature. It won't kill a 6/6, for example, at least without combat damage being involved. Ultimately, this is the kind of card that I play a little bit less than others because, sure, it's only 1 mana, but it does cost a card. It's probably just playable at around the 23rd card slot. Obviously, if Historic matters for you, it goes up quite a bit. I don't think I would count this as removal. I'm not sold on it. I've got it at like a C-. I think I cut this quite a lot unless I'm really looking for artifacts. Up next is Damping Sphere. Damping Sphere is 2 generic mana for an artifact at uncommon. If a land is tapped for 2 or more mana, it produces 1 colorless instead of any other type and amount. Each spell a player casts costs 1 more to cast for each other spell that player has cast this turn. This card's an F. It is not for limited. There is one land that this will turn off in this format. And your opponent casting 2 spells, costing 1 more, that's not that big of a deal. This is purely for Modern. This is to screw over Tron. This is to screw over Storm, etc. This is not for us. F, last pick. Up next is Forebear's Blade. Forebear's Blade is 3 generic mana for an artifact equipment at rare. Equipped creature gets +3/+0 and has Vigilance and Trample. Equip cost of 3. Sounds okay, but whenever the equipped creature dies, you attach Forebear's Blade to target creature you control. It does a hell of an impersonation of Rancor. Maybe just better than Rancor because you don't even have to recast it. A really solid card here. It keeps you open. It goes in basically every deck unless you're somehow really low on creatures, like you're a blue-black control deck with like 6 creatures or something, but that's not going to be too often. This card's great. I think it's just a solid B. You could happily first pick this because it keeps you open, and as I said, goes in basically every deck. So solid B for Forebear's Blade. Up next is Gilded Lotus. Gilded Lotus is 5 generic mana for an artifact at rare. You tap it, and you get 3 mana of any one color. So it's a reusable Black Lotus, but it costs a whole lot more. Yeah, if you're doing 5-color shenanigans, if you're splashing for your Daragaz or for your Muldrotha, etc., this will help you out. If you're in a 2-color deck and you're not ramping, you just don't play it. You flat out don't play it. But if you are ramping, if you're looking to splash, this is kind of a B-. It would be a nice pickup. I don't think you first pick it. Not in this format anyways. So B- for Gilded Lotus when you need it. Up next is Guardians of Koilos. Guardians of Koilos is 5 generic mana for an artifact creature construct at common. It's a 4/4. When Guardians of Koilos enters the battlefield, you may return another target historic permanent you control to its owner's hand. It's a big dumb 5/5 that I guess primarily is meant to return your sagas, because why would you return your legendary creatures unless they had a really cool ETB effect, which not a ton of them do. It doesn't have flash or anything, so you're not saving them from removal. So I think this is just a big dumb 4/4. I'm not super sold on it. I've got it at a C-. I think you just cut it really regularly. If you really want to do the mess around with sagas thing, which I don't even think is good, go the rescue route. Don't go the Guardians of Koilos route. Up next is Helm of the Host. Helm of the Host is 4 generic mana for a legendary artifact equipment at rare. At the beginning of combat on your turn, create a token that's a copy of equipped creature, except the token isn't legendary if the equipped creature is legendary, so it gets to live. That token gains haste. Equip for 5 generic mana. There is a lot of mana investment going on here. You are paying 9 mana and a turn to get that first copy of a creature. But once you do, you're getting a copy every single turn. And then if you do need to move it, you should have the mana available to move it, since you did move it the one time. I don't know about this card. It feels really, really, really slow, but the power is certainly there, especially if you throw this on like a flyer or something. So I'm going to put it at like a B-. I will probably try first picking it if I see it in a draft relatively early in the first week or two, and we'll see how it goes. We'll start at a B-. It could just be way too slow. Up next is Howling Golem. Howling Golem is 3 generic mana for an artifact creature golem at uncommon. It's a 2/3. Whenever Howling Golem attacks or blocks, each player draws a card. I'm not a super big fan of this. Also, I wonder what players think about why this golem is howling if they're not familiar with Howling Mine. Anyways, it's a 2/3 for 3, which isn't the best. It's a symmetrical draw effect, which is not something I'm a big fan of. Giving your opponents resources while getting in for 2 or blocking with a 2/3 is not really something that I'm excited about. I think this reads better than it is. I think people are going to pick this too highly, play this too highly. I've got it at like a D+. I'm not going to play this, at least to start. D+ for Howling Golem. Up next is Icy Manipulator. Icy Manipulator is 4 generic mana for an artifact at uncommon. Pay 1 and tap it. Tap target artifact, creature, or land. Icy Manipulator is amazing. I love it. I love formats that have something like this. You may have experienced Pacification Array, or the other one from Amonkhet, the big one that got brick counters. That one was probably slightly better than this. But yeah, this is super powerful. Getting to tap a creature for 1 mana is very big game. Getting to turn off an opponent's color because you can tap a land, continuing to screw them on lands, can be a very big game. Icy Manipulator is just super good. Its inclusion suggests to me that I'm gonna love the heck out of this draft format, which, by the way, is only around for like 9 weeks before Core Set 2019 pre-release. I kind of hope I don't love this format because it's around for such a short time. Anyways, it's an easy B, easy first pick. Makes me super happy. Actually, it's probably just a B+. B+ for Icy Manipulator. Up next is Joyra's Familiar. Joyra's Familiar is 4 generic mana for an artifact creature bird. It's an uncommon 2/2, flying. Historic spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. It's a 2/2 flyer for 4. It's a little bit overcosted. I prefer Windrakes, of course. But if you're in the Artifacts deck, if you're in the Historics Matter versions decks, if it's blue-red, blue-white, whatever, you're chock full of legends, etc., this could be an okay pickup. It's mid-pack, though, at the earliest, and only once you have things that you actually want reduced. So, C+ for Joyra's Familiar. If you don't have the stuff to take advantage of it, you just don't play it. Up next is Jousting Lance. Jousting Lance is 2 generic mana for an artifact equipment at common. Equipped creature gets +2/+0 as long as it's your turn. Equipped creature has first strike. Equip for 3 generic mana. Not a huge fan of this. We're looking at 5 mana to get something +2/+0. No toughness boost is kind of a pain, and getting first strike is cool, I guess, but only on your turn. First strikers are often great because they can attack, they can be very aggressive, but they also block really, really, really well. And this doesn't do that. So I think I'm just kind of out on Jousting Lance. I think it's just one of those pieces of equipment that you don't super care about. So I don't think it's a Pirate's Cutlass. I think it's more of like a honed Kopesher. So C- for Jousting Lance. Up next is Juggernaut. Juggernaut is back. Juggernaut is 4 generic mana for an artifact creature, Juggernaut, at uncommon. It's a 5/3. Juggernaut attacks each combat if able. Juggernaut can't be blocked by walls. So it's a 5/3 for 4, has to attack every single turn, and it can't be blocked by a deep frozen creature or an Amaranthian wall. That obviously doesn't matter. Juggernaut kind of annoys me because it's always just kind of playable. That single point of toughness really does change this from being a Cobble Brute to being a Juggernaut. Plus, it's colorless. We'll see if Juggernaut continues to be begrudgingly playable, but you should probably pick this up as soon as you know you're going to be aggressive and creaturey, and this is just kind of your top end. This is the thing that your opponent goes, oh crap, I got to block that, and lets through your 2/2s and 1/2s and 1/3s and 3/1s and etc. So Juggernaut's probably a C, and I kind of hate that it's probably a C. Up next is Mishra's Self-Replicator. Mishra's Self-Replicator is 5 generic mana for an artifact creature, Assembly Worker, but there's no shenanigans going on in this set with that, for at rare for 2/2. Whenever you cast a historic spell, you may pay 1. If you do, create a token that's a copy of Mishra's Self-Replicator. This seems super fun, and someday on stream, I'm going to take it and give it a go when I'm bored and feel like throwing away some money. It's a 5 mana of 2/2, and that is horrifying. That is awful. Then if you cast a historic spell, and you have mana left over, which I guess you should if it's turn 6 or later at this point, then you get yourself a 2/2. Cool. Then if you do it again, and you have 2 mana left over, you can get yourself 2 more 2/2s. Now you've got 8/8, and you've invested 8 mana to get that 8/8. That's actually pretty cool. But boy, do you gotta go deep on this. I've got this like a D+. It's a build around, and I don't think it's a good build around. I'm gonna do it someday, but don't do what I do. D+ for Mishra's Self-Replicator. Up next is Mox Amber. We got a Mox, and it's bad. It's 0 generic mana, so it's free. It's a legendary artifact at Mythic. Tap it to add 1 mana of any color among legendary creatures and planeswalkers that you currently control. So it does not do the one thing that Moxes do, which is tap for mana on turn 1, ever. So that's pretty bad. Yeah, I don't think you play this. I don't think you pick this. Obviously, if you're keeping the cards, which you should. I hate rare redrafting in stores. I think it's a bad store idea to do that. You pick this card for value, but it's not good. You don't play it. You never play it. It's an F. Straight F. It's bad. F for Mox Amber. Up next is Navigator's Compass. Navigator's Compass is 1 generic mana for an artifact at common. When Navigator's Compass enters the battlefield, you gain 3 life. Tap. Until end of turn, target land you control becomes the basic land type of your choices in addition to its other types. So it's basically Prophetic Prism, except it doesn't draw the card. It gains you 3 life instead. You're tapping a land, you're tapping this, you're basically filtering a color. The fact that it doesn't replace itself is probably not good and probably makes this a lot lower. But there also isn't a ton of fixing in this format, so I think if you are playing Daragaz, if you're playing Muldrotha, if you're splashing something super splashy and awesome, you probably begrudgingly play this, especially if you're splashing something in a Historic Matters deck. But a 2-color deck does not play this card ever, and if you can help it, if you can be green and get the ramp spells and the land cycling spells and stuff like that, go that route before you go the Compass route. So I've got it as C-, but in a lot of decks it's just an F. Up next is Pardic Wanderer. Pardic Wanderer is 6 generic mana for an artifact creature golem at common. It's a 5/5. It's got trample. So it's almost like Colossal Dreadmaw. just not quite there. You're paying the same cost and you're getting 1/1 less, which is not the best, but this is probably still just fine as a big dumb trampler. And by fine I mean C. You'll pick this relatively late. You won't put it in a lot of decks, but you'll play it and feel okay with it in a number of other decks. So straight C for Partic Wanderer. Up next is Power Stone Shard. Power Stone Shard is 3 generic mana for an artifact common. Tap, add colorless for each artifact you control named Power Stone Shard. So the first one taps for 1. If you got 2, you get to tap them for 4. And remember, that's about all you should ever expect, because on average, you're only getting 2 copies of any specific common in a draft. Sure, some drafts have 7 copies, but on average, you're gonna see 2 of these, and somebody else might just pick it up. Now we do have Kicker, we do have Historic Matters, we do have Ramp, so a 3 generic mana rock that taps for colorless could maybe begrudgingly be playable, but I don't think you go in on this if you can help it. Get your Llanowar Elves, get your ramp spells, get other stuff before you start mucking around with this. And don't get into Magical Christmas Land of you having a bajillion of these, because it probably isn't going to happen. And even if it does, what does it do? It's still just colorless mana. Yeah, I've got this at a D+. I don't think Power Stone Shard's very good by itself. And even the second one, I'm still not sold on. Up next is Shield of the Realm. Shield of the Realm is 2 generic mana for an artifact equipment at uncommon. If a source would deal damage to equipped creature, prevent 2 of that damage. Equip cost, 1 generic mana. I don't really care. I'm taking up a card slot by playing this. I'm investing 3 mana to make a creature a little bit less vulnerable. I'm not super sold on it. If artifacts matter in my deck, it does go up, because then it enables stuff and helps me live a bit longer to do my jank. But I'm not super sold on it. I've got it at a D+. I just don't think it's any good. D+ for Shield of the Realm. Up next is Short Sword, the Historic Short Sword. 1 generic mana for an artifact equipment at common. Equipped creature gets +1/+1. Equip cost, of course, is 1. Also not very good. +1/+1 for 2 mana. Plus, it costs a card in your deck. Is not very good. I've got Short Sword at a D+. I'm not going to be playing it. I don't really like it. Honed Kopesh was a card that was not necessarily the best. It was sort of mildly okay in one of the most aggressive formats we've ever seen. In this format, no. D+ for Short Sword. Up next is Skittering Surveyor. Skittering Surveyor is 3 generic mana for an artifact creature construct at common. It's a 1/2. When Skittering Surveyor enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. This is how you want to splash. You want this before you want the compass. This is fine. It's a body that lets you go and get that one special land that you really wanted, that forest or that mountain or whatever you need to cast your Daragaz or your Meldrotha or whatever. Or sometimes it just saves you that hand of nothing but plains, and you can go get your swamp. This is fine. I would sometimes play this in a 2-color deck, usually if I was just kind of hurting for a 23rd card, and I wouldn't feel too horrible about it. And then if I was splashing, it goes up in value even more. Skittering Surveyor is just kind of a solid C. The only time that you don't play it is if you're in a 2-color deck and you have other stuff. So C for Skittering Surveyor. Up next is Sorcerer's Wand. Sorcerer's Wand is 1 generic mana for an artifact equipment at uncommon. Equipped creature has tap. This creature deals 1 damage to target player or planeswalker. If this creature is a wizard, it deals 2 damage to that player or planeswalker instead. Equip cost of 3. This doesn't say creature, just be aware. It is not Prodigal Sorcerer. It is only pinging your opponent. That being said, people tend to really underestimate pingers to opponent's face. That can be some real damage over several turns. But I think this has to be in the hands of a wizard for it to be doing really good work. There's not really any on-tap shenanigans that are happening in this format, so it's not like you're going to be ping on tap, ping on tap, ping on tap, haha, go. That's just not going to happen. There's no crab combo here. So Sorcerer's Wand is probably just another D+ equipment. The equip cost is a little bit high. The effect isn't quite gonna get there in this format that easily, but I would like to see somebody do it. I would like to see this go into like a blue-red Wizards deck that maybe aims a little bit more controlling and kind of has this as one of their win conditions, one of the ways to finish out the game. I'm going to keep this at a D+. It could really kind of go either way. This could be a straight F. This could be like a C+. But let's go with a D+ for Sorcerer's Wand. Up next is Sparring Construct. Sparring Construct is 1 generic mana for an artifact creature construct at common. It's a 1/1. When Sparring Construct dies, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. It's a 1/1 for 1. I don't really care for 1/1s for 1. When it dies, I get a counter. Cool, but I had to play this card. And that feels bad. I've got this at a D+ as well. I just don't play this card. If Historic matters, cool. I'll jam them in. Otherwise, no. Up next is Thrawn Temporal Gateway. Thrawn Temporal Gateway is 4 generic mana for a legendary artifact at rare. Pay 4 and tap it. You may put a historic permanent card from your hand onto the battlefield. This is obviously extremely dependent on you, A, being a pretty historical deck, and B, those historical cards getting some sort of discount here. If all of your historical cards cost 2 mana or 3 mana, giving them flash for 4 mana doesn't really seem that good. So Thrawn Temporal Gateway is so extremely dependent on what your deck looks like. If your deck has, at least a handful of 4, 5, 6 drops, maybe like a 7 or 8 drop legendary creature, and you can flash them out for 4, that's going to be pretty darn good. But if you are full of, green, white, 2 drops, you've got Sisay and you've got the other ones, Baird, I guess, it's not going to be nearly as good. So it's entirely deck dependent. I think in that big legendary deck, it's probably like a B- at best still, and in the other decks, it's just an F. So be very careful with Thrawn Temporal Gateway. I'm going to try it out at some point, but it's probably not going to be the best idea. Up next is Traxos, Scourge of Krug. Traxos is 4 generic mana for a legendary artifact creature construct at rare. It's a 7/7 with trample. It enters the battlefield tapped, and it doesn't untap during your untap step. But whenever you cast a historic spell, untap Traxos. Obviously, you need to be in a very historical deck for this, but if you are, you got yourself a 7/7 Trampler on turn 4. Tax on turn 5. This could be great if you are in that artifact deck, if you are in that historic deck, whatever colors it may be. In those decks, in the decks that have 7, 8, 9, 10 historic cards, this is like a B+. This is really good. But if you are not, you need to cut this card. You need to untap this card at least a couple times. Untapping it once is not going to be good enough. So B+ in the right deck, other decks, cut it hard. Up next is Urza's Tome. Urza's Tome is 2 generic mana for an artifact at uncommon. Pay 3, tap, draw a card, then discard a card unless you exile a historic card from your graveyard. It's a looter. It is a looter. It's a lot of mana. I prefer my looters to be free, if at all possible. If I have a card in my graveyard to throw away and it just draws me a card, cool. That's great for 3 mana. But ultimately, I've just got this as a C+. I think it's a little bit low, or a little bit slow. I think it's a little bit costly, and not exactly going to be the best. So C+ for an Urza's Tome. It is still a looter, and you can't underestimate those. Our second last artifact is Voltaic Servant. Voltaic Servant is 2 generic mana for an artifact creature construct at common. It's a 1/3. At the beginning of your end step, untap target artifact. Maybe you can throw Traxos in with these. Plus, casting this will untap Traxos. Voltaic Servant. It's gonna encourage some shenanigans, and people are gonna try it out. And there's gonna be that one time where all kinds of BS is gonna happen to you because they have a Voltaic Servant. But realistically, I'm not sold on this. I've got it at C-. If you can build that shenanigan deck, let me know. But at that point, we are utterly defying the grade system. We can't grade a card if it's in this one specific deck with 3 other cards and 2 other cards and also this card, and etc. So C- for Voltaic Servant. Be aware that strange things can be done with it. Our final artifact is the Weatherlight itself. Weatherlight is 4 generic mana for a legendary artifact vehicle at Mythic. It's a 4/5 flyer. Crew 3. Whenever Weatherlight deals combat damage to a player, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a historic card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. I'm not super sold on the Weatherlight. It's a 4/5 flyer. That's cool for 4 generic mana. Crew 3 is not the easiest. We've seen this. We've seen vehicles enough now to know that Crew 1 is amazing. Crew 2 is okay. and crew 3 starts to become a little bit difficult to pull off. And if you do pull it off, you get a 4/5 flyer. Cool, that's great. That's actually really good. You are going to attack in with kind of a somewhat bad Sarah Angel, and things are going to be fine. If you deal combat damage, you get to dig through your library for a historic spell. Cool, but you have to have that historic spell. You have to be hitting your opponent in the face with a 4/5 flyer, which if you are, they're probably dead pretty darn soon anyways, so the whole ability is just win more. Ultimately, I think the Weatherlight is just kind of a fine vehicle. It is not Looter Scooter. I can't even think of the real name of it right now. It is not Renegade Freighter. It is not any of those things. I've got it at a C+, which feels a little bit low. So I guess I'll go up to a B-, and maybe that's just because it's the Weatherlight and I feel like I have to. So let's go with a B- for Weatherlight. I don't think it's that amazing, to be honest. B- for Weatherlight. Alright, so with the artifacts out of the way, we have to move on to the lands, and they should go relatively quick. Up first, we have Cabal Stronghold. Cabal Stronghold is a rare land that you tap to add a colorless. It's pretty bad, but you can also pay 3 generic and tap it to add black for each basic swamp you control. This is really awful. Like, if I have 3 swamps in this, I can tap 4 lands to make 3 mana. Got there. Even at 6 swamps in this, I can get 9 mana, so I'm up 2 whole mana. This card's bad. It's an F. It's unplayable. Don't play this card. F for Cabal Stronghold. Up next is a cycle of lands. We've got Clifftop Retreat, Hinterland Harbor, Isolated Chapel, Sulphur Falls, and Woodland Cemetery. All of these lands entered tapped unless you have one of the basic types that it taps for, so unless you have a mountain or plains for Clifftop Retreat, and they tap for one of those 2 colors. We've seen all kinds of lands like these. We've seen these lands before in the original Innistrad. They're fine. If you're in those 2 colors, cool, great. You got yourself a land. You got yourself fixing. That's awesome. If you're in one of the colors and you're splashing the others, cool, great, that's awesome. But that's all they are. They're just boring duels. They're just a C. They're not a card that you spend a super real pick on, but you're happy to have them when you see them. So C for all 5 of these lands. The other 5 lands we have are a cycle, but they're all very different, so we got to talk about all of them one by one. Memorial to Folly is a land at uncommon. It enters the battlefield tapped, as all of these do. Taps to add a black, as all of these do, if for their color, blue, white, whatever. And they each have a spell attached to them. So for 2 and a black and tap and sacrifice Memorial to Folly, you can return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So it's that effect that I don't super love, but it's attached to a land. So I can play this land, I can play it as a tapped swamp, and it taps for black mana as the game goes on, and then eventually, when something shows up that I really want, I get to sack this land, and it didn't cost me a card. So I'm actually pretty fine with this. I think it's an auto-include, unless you are super aggro and a tap land would be too hard for you. But even then, I think it's just okay-ish. I've got it like a C. I'm fine with Memorial to Folly. Up next is Memorial to Genius, the blue version. It has all the same stuff. For 4 and a blue, you can tap it, sacrifice it to draw 2 cards. This, I think, might be the best one. So you've got yourself an island. It taps, but you may very well be a little bit control-y if you're playing blue. And then later in the game, when you've got enough mana, hey, you've got yourself 2 more cards. What more does blue want than 2 more cards? This one's great. C+, auto-include in basically every blue deck again, unless you're somehow super aggro. Memorial to Glory is the white one. Pay 3 and a white, tap it, sacrifice it to create 2 1/1 white soldier creature tokens. This one, I don't super care for as much, because the whole point of spell lands like this is that on turn 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, you crack it and you get some value. Here you get 2 1/1s, which is not anything on turn 7, 8, 9, 10, etc. So Memorial to Glory is fine. I guess it's still a C, but that's about it. I would never go higher than a C on this, maybe even low as a C-. Memorial to Unity is the green version. For 2 and a green, tap and sacrifice it. You get to look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature card from among them and put it into your hand. Then put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. This seems good. You get to dig for that game-ending creature that you unfortunately haven't seen yet, or maybe that utility creature that'll help you out. This is fine. I think it's my second favorite after the blue one, and I think it's just a straight C+ in green decks that want to dig to their ramp targets. C+ for Memorial to Unity. Memorial to War is red one, and as usual, the red one is the worst one. Pay 4 and a red, tap it, sacrifice it, destroy target land. No. You blow up a land to blow up one of their lands. That is awful. Plus, you pay 5 mana, 6 mana to do so because you're tapping this one as well. This is awful. You don't play it. It's an F. It's just awful. Don't play Memorial to War. Our final card, our final land, is Zhalfirin Void. It is an uncommon land that when it enters the battlefield, you get to scry 1, tap it to add a colorless to your mana pool. This is really interesting. This is like the temples from Theros, but they entered tapped, but they did tap for 2 colors. I think the Theros temples are significantly better than this card. Still, this is probably just totally fine in a 2-color deck. It's a colorless land, so it does hurt your mana base, but as long as you don't have too many double-colored spells, as long as you're not splashing, I think you just always play this. I don't think it's quite the C+ level, but I think it is a solid C. So C for Zhalfirin Void. So that's going to wrap it up for all the cards in Dominaria. This video was definitely a bit longer because we covered a heck of a lot more cards in this one than we did in the other 5. But let me know what you thought of Dominaria, of these cards. What are you psyched for the pre-release? I'm going to have all kinds of pre-release content leading up to this, of course. But the top 10 lists will finally be coming back. I'm finally going to have time to get those out for Dominaria. We're going to have pre-release vlog of all of my pre-releases that I go to. I'm going to go to 2, a very big one and a somewhat smaller one. Gonna hopefully have a live draft of Dominaria up on the Twitch channel, etc. So make sure you do stay tuned for that. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, you can find me on Twitter at TheManaLeek. That's L-E-E-K, like the vegetable, not the card. You can also find me at Facebook.com/TheManaLeek, Twitch.tv/TheManaLeek, and Patreon.com/TheManaLeek. If you like the content, click that thumbs up button. Click subscribe if you want to see more. And if you do have questions, comments, or suggestions, let me know. Otherwise, I will see you all at the pre-release.